Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniel. Have you ever needed to translate something but just couldn't find the right tool? Or maybe you've struggled with clunky, slow, or inaccurate translation services? Well, today that's all about to change. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build your own supercharged translation tool using MERN Stack. And trust me, it's going to be amazing. You will have your own very app where you can instantly translate text between languages with a single click. We'll dive into the frontend with React, build the backend with Express, and integrate it with an API that can give you fast and accurate translations. Whether you're translating from English to Hindi or any language that you want, we've got you covered. So get ready for an exciting coding session. Let's turn your translation dream into reality. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Finally, hit that notification bell. Hi there, welcome to the first part of our tutorial. We'll start by creating our project folder in which we are going to set our project. To do that, we'll navigate to File and then Open Folder. Then I'll navigate to my desktop and I'll create a new folder and I'll name it Text Tool. Then I'll select the folder. The next thing to do is to install React. I'll come here on these three dots here, then I'll click on Terminal, New Terminal. Inside the terminal, I'll create another folder and I'll name it Client. So I'll just use this command, make directory. Great, we have created the client folder using the terminal. You can see we have the client folder here. We'll navigate inside the client folder and install React. So I'll just say cd client, then I'll type this command to install React. npx create react app, and then space and the dot. This dot ensures that the project will be created inside the clients folder. Then press enter. After installing React correctly, we have these commands that we have given here. npm starts the development server, npm run build, it bundles the app into static files for production. But in this case, we're just interested with this command only, npm start. But before we start our development server, let us just do some few cleanups. Navigate towards your clients folder, click this, and you can see that we have React folders and dependencies installed. I'll navigate towards my source folder, and then inside app.js, I'll drag this down. I'll also increase the size of the code so that it can be more visible. Inside this file app.js, I'll just change it to app.jsx. So I'll right click and then rename, and I'll name it app.jsx, then press enter. Then inside this return function, I'll collapse this div and delete everything inside. Then I'll create another div and just say app. Simple as that. We do not need the React logo, so I'll delete this part. The next thing we need to do, inside this folder, I'll right click and then click on new file, and we shall name it translate.js. Translate.js. Then I'll use a shortcut by just typing RFCE like this, and inside here I'll say translate. This component, translate.jsx, will be used to write up all functions that will be required for creating our translation app. If you want to get shortcuts for creating functions like this, just navigate here inside your extensions and search for React snippets. This one here, simple React snippets, and ensure that it is installed. After creating the translate component, we need to call it inside our app.jsx. I'll just navigate here inside app.jsx and I'll call this component here. So I'll just call translate. And you can see we have a suggestion here which is correct, translate. And automatically it has imported it here. We can run our server to see the changes. To run our server, we'll just come here, navigate towards client and type npm start. This is beautiful. We can see that after running our app, we have translate here, which is exactly the component that we have called. So I'll just push this one here and also minimize our VS Code component so that we can see the changes in real time. So in a simple way, we are only calling one component translate, and translate.jsx has only this text translate. Or to make it simple, I can just say I'm a translate component, and automatically our browser has refreshed and says I'm a translate component. I'll enlarge this so that it can be more visible. The next thing we need to do is actually import our image that will be used as a banner for this app. I have the image in the desktop folder, so I'll just drag this aside, and I already have this image here in the desktop. So I'll just drag and drop inside the public folder, this folder here. So I'll drag it inside the public folder. Nice. The image has been imported successfully. Let us come back inside our translate.jsx and call this image here. Before we call the image, let us navigate to index.jsx, this one here. This is the main file. Now I'll just do some cleanup. We do not need this index.css. We'll not be using this file. So that is the only thing that you need to delete. I'll delete this and create a division with a class name of app. Inside this division, we're going to render our image. I'll call an image component img, which is a self-closing element, and then inside the source, we'll just pass a / and the name of the picture, transbanner.png. If we check inside the public folder, our banner has a name of transbanner.png, and that is what I've just called here. And the alternative name will be translate. This is the alternative name for the image. I'll widen this, and you can see we have this banner here, which is superb translation. Now, in order for us to style this, we need a CSS file. But I'll use a CSS file that is already provided here inside app.jsx. As you can see, we have imported here app.css. Therefore, just come here and search for app.css. It's actually here on top. And I'll just highlight everything and delete. Our main container will have a background of a slight blue. So just background and this color, slight blue. And the height will be 100% of the vertical height. So 100 VH. Now as you can see, we have a blue color here. I'll just widen this, and you can see we have this image here, and the background is blue, which is great. The next CSS will be for this image here. So I'll just say .app img, and I want width to be 100%. You can see it has taken the whole page width, which is great. And I want the height to be 250 pixels. We'll create another class name for text input. Inside this division with the class name of text input, we're going to render two text areas. One will be used for actually inputting the message that we want to translate, and the other one will be used for showing the translated message. So I'll just call text area component. This text area will have a placeholder of enter text. Let me enlarge this so that you can see it. We'll also have a similar placeholder, the second placeholder for translating the text. So I'll just copy this and place it here. And the placeholder for the second text area will be translation. We need to create some variables that will be used for translation. So I'll just say constant and the first variable will be from text, and we'll use a function set from text. We'll give it an initial value of an empty string. We can see that the browser is not happy, and it tells us that useState is not declared. To fix this, we need to import useState from React. Therefore, I'll just come here beneath import React from React, and I'll import useState from React. We can see that the browser is actually happy, and we do not have any errors. The next variable will be the toText, and you can see we have suggestion here, constant toText and set toText. So I can accept that. Now if you want suggestion like that, you can just come here inside extensions, and we'll search for an extension known as tab9. This one here. You can install this one if you want to have code auto-completion suggestion. Alternatively is you can use Copilot. Now the first constant will be used to set the text that will be used inside this first text area, and the second one will be used to set the text inside the translation. We also need two variables that will be used to set the language. So from the language that we are translating to another language that will be translated to. So I'll just say constant from language. From language, I'll give it an initial value of this country code, and to language, I'll give it an initial value of this, the Indian language code. Now that we have set these variables, let us consume them inside this text area component. The first text area component value will be from text, and the second text area component value will be toText. For the second text area component, I'll give it a property of read only. The first text area, I'll give it an onChange. So I'll accept this suggestion. The text input will have the following properties. Display will be flex. We'll have a gap of 15 pixels. You can see we have this gap already that has been created of 15 pixels. We'll have a max width of 100%. Let us give CSS for the text area. Width will be 100%. The minimum height will be 100 pixels. You can see the changes that has taken place. We have the text area has enlarged. Let us style this placeholder here. Font size will be italic. Font style will be italic. I'll widen this, and we can see we have two text areas. One will be used to enter the text that will be translated, and the second text area will be used to actually translate the text. Immediately after this div of class text input, we need to create another div, and we shall name it controls. So I'll just use a shortcut and say controls. Inside the div, we'll render a button. We'll give the button a class name of btn. So btn, a short form for button. The next step is to style this button. So I'll come back inside app.css and give styles to that button. First, I'll give the styles to controls. Display will be flex. Justify content will be center. Margin top will be 20 pixels. Button will have these properties. We'll have this padding. We'll give it this background color. Font size will be 1.1 rem. Font weight will be 600. border radius will be 8 pixels. I'll change this background color to be slightly blue. So I'll change this color code to this. This button here will be used to handle translate function. So I'll give it an on click of handle translate. So I'll just say on click and I'll pass it handle translate. And you can see that the browser is not happy because handle translate is not defined. So the next thing we're going to actually define this function that will be used for translation. So I'll come here on top, just beneath this function declaration here, and I'll create a function called handle translate. We'll implement handle translate later, but at the moment let us just alert with this message translating. When we click this button here, you can see we have a pop-up that says translating. We'll come back to this function later and refine it more, but at the moment let us just proceed. Just immediately before this division of controls, we'll create another division and we'll give it a name of language select. Inside this div of language select, we'll have a select option. Nice, and we can see we have this nice drop-up button here. The first selection, I'll give it a value of from language, and I'll highlight this and just copy, since you're going to have two selections. The first selection will be for which language do you want to translate from, and the second selection will be for which language do you want your text to be translated to. That's why we have a to language and a from language. Remember, we had already declared these variables here on top of this page. We had declared them here. So we have from the language and to which language. The first selection will give it an on change to actually set the language and taking the input and setting the input to be the from text. In the first selection, we're taking the input and setting the value to be for the first text area. And we'll do the same. So I'll copy this on change, and I want to set for the second option the value to be for the second text area. And instead of setting from to text, it will be setting to text, which is the value for the second text area. The first on change sets a value for the first input field, and the second on change sets the value for the second input field. The first selection will have an on change that will be used to set from language. So I'll just copy this on change here, this function here, and we'll make some changes. So I'll copy it and come here inside, just inside the first selection, and then I'll paste it here. But instead of from to text, it will be from language. So I'll also copy this and I'll give it for the second selection, and instead of from language, it will be to language. Inside these options, we need to populate a country and its code. For that purpose, I'll come here inside our main project, inside the source folder, I'll create a new file and I'll name it data.js. Inside this function data.js, we'll create an object of countries. Inside this object, we'll populate a country's name and its code. We need to use these values inside our translate.jsx. Before we use the country's data, we actually need to import them. So I'll just import them above here. So I'll say import. We're importing countries from data.js. After importing the countries object, we need to convert the countries object into an array and actually map them. So we'll do this and say object.entries. Object.entries is used to convert an object to an array. So we'll pass in the countries. This is the object that we want to change to an array, and then we need to map it. So I'll say .map. Then we want to map with a country's individual code and the name. So we are converting the object into an array, and the object that we are converting is the countries, and then we are actually mapping the array with its respective code and its respective name, and we are creating an option, and the key is code and the value still is code, and then inside the option we are rendering just the name. So you can see we have a drop down here. When you click, we have a list of countries, and this list of countries is tied to this function select from language. Let us have a look at this function select from language. Actually, you need to change this one here. It's not supposed to be curly braces but angle brackets like this. So just change this. You also need to change from lang so that we suppress the errors. Nice. If you have done that correctly, then if we select this one, for instance, let us change our language and change it to Czech. You can see that it has changed to Czech. We can also change our language to, let's say, Greek, and you can see it has changed to Greek. I'll just copy that and we'll use it for the second selection option, this second selection here. So I'll copy this and then I'll paste it inside the second selection. Great, you can see that languages are populated here with different countries. So we have Danish, German, Greek, French, and if I select one, you can see that it is Galatian. If I refresh the page, we can see that we have the default language is just the same as the one that we had declared here. We need to provide stylings to these two options here, and to do that, we'll simply just move inside our app.css and give the stylings there. Language select will have these properties. Display will be flex. Flex direction will be row. Align items will be center. And justify content will be center. Now immediately we put justify content center, we see that the two options have moved to the center. Gap will be 1 rem. Margin top will be 20 pixels. We also give the select option some properties. So I'll say language select. Let me minimize so that you can see the changes. Padding will be 10 pixels and 15 pixels respectively. 10 pixels and 15 pixels. Font size will be 16 pixels. Font family will be sans serif. Border will be 2 pixels. Border radius will be 8 pixels. Width will be 200 pixels. Let us see the changes. When we look at the changes, you can see that it is looking beautiful. Finally, we need a button in between these two options so that we can change. For instance, we want to change from this language to this language here. We can just click a button here. So I'll just come back inside my translate.jsx, and in between these two first options here, I'll have a button with this symbol. As you can see, we have this button. I'll also change this button here and I'll name it translate. So I'll come here, just below here, and I'll name it to translate. Translate like that. Nice. You can see we have translate, and we also have this button with this symbol. I'll also give this button an on click, and it will be handle exchange. Nice. You can see that our program is not happy because handle exchange is not declared. So the next thing, let us declare this function handle exchange. So we have a function to handle language exchange, which is actually swap functionality. Let us see how we implement it, and we'll see it in action. So what we'll do is just say set from text, and we'll give it a value of set to text. We are just swapping. And we'll do the same for set to text, and we'll give it a value of set from text. Set from text. And we'll also change the language. We'll do the same for the language. So we'll set from language, and we'll give it a value of set to language. So when I click this button, it should swap the position of Hindi to Amharic. Let us see. Great. You can see that it has swapped the position of Hindi to Amharic. The final part of our front end will be actually to implement this translation functionality. We'll first check if we have some data in the input field. So just to do that, we just do this. We say from text dot trim. We'll set to text, and we'll give it a value of translating. So it will just say translating. We'll have a try and catch block. Inside the try, we're going to try and fetch data. So we'll say constant response is equal to await and fetch. And inside it, we're going to pass the URL. You can see we have a red mark here, meaning that the browser is not happy we are using await. But actually, when you're using await, since it means that the function is going to take some time. And to fix that, you ensure that your function has an asynchronous. Is actually asynchronous. So you just key in async. And you can say constant response is equals to await, and inside it we're going to paste in the URL that we're going to get information from. We are fetching data from the backend, but we have not yet set up the backend. But I'll assume we'll be using localhost 5000 in our backend. So I'll use that as the URL. And we're going to pass in a text parameter, which is going to be from text. We're also passing in a source parameter. So I'll put a $sign and curly braces, and inside it I'll just say from language. And finally I'll put the target, and the target will be to language. After that, we need to check whether the response is okay. And to do that, it's simply this. So we say if not response, then we're going to throw a new error, and inside the error we're going to console this translation failed. Great. If the translation has not failed, we need to set the to text, and we'll set in the value of the response. Let me explain. This statement means if you are having a valid response, then there's to text. Remember, the to text is whatever is inside the input field, the second input field. So we'll set the value that has been translated, or the words that has been translated inside this input field here. If we have a positive response, we need to declare another variable, and we shall call it translated text. and we'll assign this value to response.text, since we are sure that it is in text format. And finally, we'll set the toText to the translated text. Otherwise, we need to catch an error, and we can actually console the error. So I'll accept this. So we can console the error and set to text translation failed. Congratulations, if you have reached here, we are done with the front end, and in the next section we'll be setting up our backend. Before we set up our backend, we'll try to actually do some translation. We know it will fail, but let us just try and do it, since we have not set up any backend part. My language will be English. I'll choose English, and I'll say hello user. Then I'll try to translate to Hindi. When I click here, translation has failed. This is because we have not yet set up our backend. And if you have done this step, then congratulations. The next part will be looking at the backend. In this section, we'll create the backend part. To do that, we'll create a backend folder. Therefore, we need to navigate to the terminal. Click on these three dots here, then terminal, new terminal. I'll just move the terminal up here above. Ensure that you are in your root folder, which is text tool. Then you're going to make a new directory and you're naming it backend. You can use this command here and press enter. And if we come back and check, you can see that the backend folder has been created. Alternatively, in a more simpler manner, you can just click on here, new folder, then click on it, and then you can actually create a backend folder. Let us navigate to our backend folder. I'll ensure that I'm in the backend folder, so I'll cd backend. Then I can install these packages. The first package is actually Express. The second package is NodeMon. NodeMon will be used to restart the server. And finally, the last package will be Cause. Cause will be used to allow us to communicate from the backend and the front end. So communication between the client and the backend is only allowed using the cause or the cause policy. We'll actually see this in practice, but at the moment, just press enter. After installing the packages, we need to initialize the JSON packages. So to do that, we say npm init space -y, then press enter. And we can actually see what it has done. It has created these files for us in the JSON, which will tell us about the dependencies. It will tell us about the name of the project, which is backend. It will also tell us about the author, license, description, and you can actually check this. You can come backend and package.json, and you can see the same information that is in the terminal. It's the same that is here. You have description, license, author, and keywords. If you're proud of yourself for reaching this step, you can put your name here inside the author. My name is Code with Daniel, so I'll use that. And description will be superb text translation app or website. When you come here on top, you can see that we have main. Main means our entry point. It tells us that our entry point is index.js, but I don't like using index.js, so I'll use server.js. Now, what is the main entry point? It means a file that will be used to run the server application in the backend. For instance, let us create our entry point. I'll just come here, ensure that we are inside backend folder, then click on new file, and we shall name it server.js. Now, this is our entry point. This is where we'll be writing our server code. So we need to change that. Just come here inside your backend folder, and we'll change it from index.js to server.js. Another thing that we need to change is the type. We are using ES6 format. Therefore, just say type, and I'll use module, not common.js. Finally, I'll delete this. I'll say start. I will use nodemon to restart my server. Therefore, I'll say nodemon server.js. That means when I type npm start, it's actually going to execute this part of the code, and it's going to just start the server. You can actually see this in practice. I'll open the terminal. I'll click here. I just click here, terminal, new terminal. First, I'll delete this previous terminal. Then I'll cd backend. But before we run anything in the server.js, let us just console something. We can just console.log that this is the main entry point. So we can console something. This is just a bare minimum code. Let us test it. Yeah, the reason of testing this is just to see the effect of this part, npm start. You can say npm start, and you can see what happens. Great. We can see we have this part is being executed. We have backend entry point. That means our entry point is this server.js. And you can also see some text here. For instance, we have nodemon and this. So nodemon is used to refresh the server automatically. That's why we installed it. For instance, I can just add another value here. Let me just add some gibberish like that. And you can see automatically we have the changes have been reflected here in the terminal. So you do not need to restart the server if you have installed nodemon. Otherwise, if you don't have nodemon, you have to restart. Every time you make a change, you need to restart the server. I'll delete this part. The first thing I want to do is import the packages that we just installed. So I'll import Express from Express. The second package I'll import will be cause. So we're importing cause from cause, Express from Express. We also need to initialize Express. So to do that, I'll just say constant app and I'll give it a value of Express. So instead of using the word Express, we'll just use the word app. Finally, we'll have core options. The first core option will be the origin. I have some suggestion here, so I'll accept this suggestion. So our front-end URL was localhost 3000, and we can also verify that. Just click here and you can see that the front-end URL was localhost 3000. Another thing we need to specify is the methods just inside the core options. What methods is the URL going to try to access? So the method will be get and post. Great. We have very many core options, but at the moment the only ones that will be applied in this project will only be two: the origin, which is the front-end URL, and the method. We are going to post something inside the backend, so we'll be using the method will be post, and we're also going to get the translation from the backend. Therefore, we'll also be using a get method. And if you've done that, then we can come here and just say app.use. We want our server to use the cause and to use the cause options that we have just declared here. Next, we need to declare a get method. To do that, I'll just say app.get. Now, for the get method, we have a couple of parameters. The first parameter will be the URL. The URL will only be just a /, and the second parameter will be the method. So we'll have an asynchronous function, which is an arrow function that will have a request and a response. So inside this asynchronous function, we'll have a try and catch statement. Inside the try block, we're going to declare three variables, which is the text, source, and target. And we're getting this from request.query. If we can have a recap, text, source, and targets are the same that we did pass inside our backend, which is translate.js. We can check that. If you come here, we can see that inside the translation method, we pass three things, which is text, source, and target. Then we'll declare a URL that will be used for translation. So we'll be using this URL http api.mymemory, and then the query will be the text, this text that we have declared here, the source, and the target that we are getting from the front end. We'll declare another variable and we'll call it response, and response will be used to fetch the data from URL. We'll also declare another variable and we'll call it JSON, and we'll say is equals to await response.json. And the third one will be matches. So we'll say constant matches await json.matches. Finally, we'll declare another variable and we'll call it translated text, and we'll check whether it matches. So we'll say matches. So in this statement, we are checking whether we have a matching translation. If we don't have a matching translation, then we'll just give a text, or we'll just say no translation. Finally, we want to give a response with the translated text. So we'll just say response.send the translated text. Inside the catch part, we can just say console.error, and we pass in the error. Or we can even give another console and say something went wrong. So you can say console.log something went wrong. After declaring this get method, we'll declare our port that will be used in the server application. So we'll say app.listen, and we'll pass in the port number. So I'll pass 5000, the same that I used in the front end. And then we can console.log something. So we can say server is running on this port. Accept it, server is running on port 5000. Or you can say server is listening or server is running. Whatever the case is true. I'm using port 5000 because if we go back inside our application, inside client, source folder, translate.jsx, I used this value here. So if you use a different value, ensure that you change it here. Great job, and we can finally run our application. I'll open the terminal and you can see our application running. So you can cd backend and just type npm start. Great, we have server is running on port 5000, which is a success. If server is running on port 5000, we can go back inside our application and give it a test. For example, I can just put here, how are you? And then I can translate to Arabic. When I click here, we have this text in Arabic format. I don't know whether this is correct. Maybe my Arabic friends can tell me. Also, I can translate from English to a different language, let's say Greek. I click here and this is the Greek equivalent of how are you. Also Breton, and this is the equivalent of how are you in Tibetan. You can also change to Czech and then click translate, and then this is the equivalent for how are you. Thank you so much for watching. Ensure that you have subscribed, liked the video, and also share to your friends. I'll be creating more content like this, for instance on Next.js, full stack MERN app like this one, courses on different programming tutorials,